With the tepid critical and commercial reception that Anthem has been receiving, concerns surrounding Bioware's future are understandable. It's obviously too early to say for sure at this point how the game will perform in the long run, or how much patience EA will have for Anthem's current middling performance. But the publisher has a long enough track record of putting acquired studios and franchises that didn't meet guidelines and projections on ice for us to know that if Anthem doesn't turn out to be a hugely profitable endeavor in the long run, Bioware may be in danger of being reprioritized, restructured, or unceremoniously axed altogether. Bioware employees certainly feel that way, with some believing that the studio's fate is closely tied to Anthem, and that should the game not live up to EA's expectations, Bioware will look very different in the future, especially after what happened to Bioware Montreal following Mass Effect Andromeda's disastrous launch. It's not just Bioware employees who feel this way though. Fans and video game enthusiasts alike have expressed their fair share of worries about what the future may hold for the once heralded studio. For example, one Twitter user published a post on February 23, 2019, stating that they hope Anthem and Bioware don't get the axe from EA and that they're worried about the developers. Now, interestingly, one Bioware developer, Michael Gamble, lead producer at the studio, has been responding to inquiries regarding grim prospects. In response to this particular tweet, Gamble had this to say: "Don't worry about us, we got lots of work to do, but you aren't the only one who likes Anthem." Another Twitter user tweeted at Michael Gamble with similar concerns, stating that they really hope EA doesn't shut down the studio. Gamble issued a similar assurance, responding with, quote, "Lots of folks are playing Anthem, and we have announced our live service plans. Don't worry about that, we are getting great support." Bioware's general manager, Casey Hudson, also painted Anthem and Bioware's future in a positive light by tweeting the following post on February 26, 2019, which reads, "Game development can be a harsh and emotional experience at times, but the support of so many amazing people in the developer and player communities is a powerful antidote. You inspire us to keep going, and we will." Now, this isn't the first time we have seen high-level developers within Bioware suggest that all is not lost should Anthem fail. You may recall that back in July 28, 2018, website Game Informer published an article transcribing an interview that they participated in with James Olin, former senior creative director at Bioware, who retired from the studio after having worked there for 22 years. At one point in the interview, Game Informer asked this: "Speaking of conspiracy theories, one of the things you see float around on the internet right now is that due to Andromeda underwhelming and EA's reputation of having an itchy trigger finger when it comes to studio closures, Bioware will be shuttered if Anthem isn't a hit. Is there any sense internally among the staff that this is the level of pressure on the studio at this point?" Olin's response to this inquiry was quite optimistic, stating, quote, "No, the more success that a studio has, the more freedom and resources that it has, so obviously Bioware wants to have success with Anthem because that will be good for the studio as a whole. However, I think EA is looking for Bioware to be a long-term part of the company. I think EA really respects what Bioware brings to it. Bioware is a lot different than all the other aspects of its business, so even if Anthem doesn't do as well, and I think it's going to be great, but if it doesn't do gangbusters, I don't think that's the end of Bioware. I think it will simply be a chance for Bioware to learn some lessons and apply it to the next game that comes out." Now, I would love nothing more than to take Michael Gamble's word for it and move forward with the assumption that there is truly nothing to be worried about, that there is a bright future ahead. I would like to think that the best is yet to come for Bioware, that the studio can recover from its current lull, that it can return to form with impending releases like Dragon Age 4 and a Mass Effect sequel, and that EA won't cut the studio's lifeline short should Anthem not meet short-term projections. I'd like to believe Olin when he says that EA is looking for Bioware to be a long-term part of the company, and that even if Anthem doesn't do so well, it won't be the end of Bioware, and that it will be more of a chance for the studio to learn some lessons and apply them to future projects. After all, gamers like myself wanted Bioware to succeed with Anthem. Nobody desired the game to launch in the state that it did to such widespread criticism, and those who were skeptical about the game leading up to its launch wanted those skepticisms to be dispelled by the final product. but alas, that was not meant to be. And as much as I respect the positive attitude that the game's high-level developers are exuding under much scrutiny and adversity, while I tip my hat to how actively communicative Bioware's biggest names have been before and after Anthem's launch, a stark contrast from how, say, Bethesda's high-level devs have gone into hiding, cowering behind their support team and community managers after the disastrous launch of Fallout 76. I do think it's important that a positive mindset doesn't detract from what's realistic. Despite Michael Gamble and Casey Hudson's assurances that they are in this for the long haul, let's face it, it's not entirely up to those two to decide BioWare's fate. If top EA executives deem BioWare to be as expendable as other studios they have axed in the past, Gamble and Hudson's desires and sentiments won't count for shit. Now, it's always possible that Gamble and Hudson know something consumers don't know. Perhaps they have some behind-the-scenes knowledge we don't that's giving them reason to believe BioWare will be safe, even if Anthem flops. But all the general public has to go on is EA's extensive history of studio reprioritizing, restructuring, scale-downs, and shutdowns after mediocre performance. Let's be real here, unless Anthem as a game or as a franchise makes a dramatic comeback over the coming year or two, it's hard to imagine that the IP will have a very long lifespan based on what we currently know. Recall that back in June 2017, when Anthem was first announced and showcased, former EA executive Patrick Soderlund expressed that Anthem could be the start of a 10-year journey for them, which is exactly what Activision and Bungie touted when they first partnered up for Destiny. And remember how that turned out? While the first Destiny game was a major success despite its rough launch, in large part because the concept of an ever-evolving shared world shooter-looter was so novel at the time, and because Bungie faced so little competition then, the second Destiny game was a completely different story. By the time Destiny 2 launched, the market had been saturated with various other similar shared world shooter-looters, which made the game's catastrophic release months and the slow pace at which updates were being rolled out so fatal, resulting in Destiny 2 losing a significant chunk of its player base early on and leading Activision to report disappointing sales figures even after the launch of the well-received Forsaken DLC and its accompanying updates, as the damage to the game had been done long before then. Thus, what was supposed to be a 10-year-long journey that would span across 4 games and multiple expansions was cut short on its 8th year across 2 games when Activision and Bungie mutually agreed to cut ties, with Bungie retaining rights to Destiny. This is what can happen when game publishers and developers count the chickens before the eggs hatch, when they focus on a 10-year plan before they've had a chance to create and ship a proper game and ensure its first year, or hell, its first day on the market, is rock solid first. EA has seemingly decided to follow in the footsteps of Activision, touting a 10-year journey for Anthem before the games even had a chance to kick off properly, and in turn, I foresee a fate not too dissimilar to Destiny. As Anthem currently stands, I cannot feel optimistic about this franchise continuing for 10 long years unless BioWare pulls one hell of a rabbit out of their hat. This goes doubly true when I take a glance at what Anthem's roadmap currently looks like, which does not paint a particularly thrilling picture. As you can see here, it lists how alongside recurring updates such as fixes, improvements, and optimizations, weekly alliance coins, daily, weekly, and monthly challenges, and vanity store refreshes, the next major update for Anthem, the Cataclysm, won't be ready until May 2019, which is 3 months after the game's launch. Everything else in between are more minor additions like new social features, free play events, new items and cosmetics, legendary missions, and whatnot, with only one new stronghold coming sometime in April. With how lackluster Anthem's endgame content, features, and incentive are currently, the game plain and simply cannot afford to go that long without significant new content, as a large portion of the player base may move on to other more compelling experiences by then, especially with competition like Division 2 looming on the horizon. While the roadmap could end up looking much more comprehensive once Acts 2 and 3 begin, one has to wonder whether the majority of players will be willing to stick around until then, given Anthem's current state, if it won't be too little too late by then. This is why it's so important that games like Anthem, which are intended to last for years on end, nail their launch and kick off running. There is nothing more crippling to these kinds of live services than an initial loss of momentum. Case in point, look at what happened to Destiny 2. Although the Forsaken DLC and its accompanying updates finally brought the game up to an adequate state, it took far too much time and too much trouble to get there, and the game permanently suffered for it. Anthem looks to be facing a similar uphill battle in the coming months, and as enthused as the folks over at Bioware might be to stay the course, I have to wonder if EA executives who only care about bottom lines feel a similar sense of enthusiasm towards a product that now stands as the worst reviewed game in Bioware's history and among the worst reviewed games in EA's history, not to mention that it's a big budget product that's already struggling to push retail copies in the UK, potentially indicating rough tidings for Anthem's overall sales. If EA does decide to stay the course as well, then hopefully we can look forward to Bioware realizing Anthem's full potential and learning from their recent mistakes to create Dragon Age and Mass Effect sequels that will remind us what the studio can achieve at their best. But if EA follows past trends and decides to give up on Anthem before it's had a chance to spread its wings, I cannot say that any amount of enthusiasm from the likes of Michael Gamble and Casey Hudson will aid BioWare's future. Now, I'm sure some might be contemplating how great it might be if something similar to the Activision-Bungie split happened, if BioWare managed to split from EA while retaining the rights to franchises like Dragon Age, Mass Effect, and even Anthem. But it's worth keeping in mind that these are two different scenarios. Whereas Bungie signed a publishing deal with Activision, BioWare was outright bought and is owned by EA. So if EA decided that BioWare is proving to be more of a liability than an asset, the most likely scenario is that we'll see the publisher absorb the studio and its IPs onto itself rather than resort to a simple parting of ways. Hopefully it never comes to that. Hopefully there is merit to Michael Gamble and Casey Hudson's optimistic outlook for BioWare and Anthem's future, but given BioWare's fate may not necessarily be up to them, and given EA has a certain reputation, and given concerns BioWare employees have expressed in the not-so-distant past, you'll have to forgive me if these tweets do not put me fully at ease. These are one man's thoughts and opinions anyway. I'd love to hear what your take is on Michael Gamble and Casey Hudson's latest statements in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.